Hey, I'm Brian Goulet of the Goulet Pen Company and Ink Nouveau, and today I'm going to be talking about micromesh. Micromesh is a fine abrasive that you use to smooth out your fountain pen nib if you feel that it has any scratchiness to it. It's really not a super fine honing tool in terms of getting a pen glassy smooth or anything like that. But if you have a pen that you feel is scratchy, or especially if it's inconsistent writing, like scratchy in one direction over another, micromesh could very well help you out. So that's what I'm going to show you how to do in this video today. So why do you need micromesh? Well, usually you don't, okay? Fountain pens in a perfect world should write exactly as you feel they should, and you should never have a problem. Well, that's not always the case, especially if you're buying cheaper pens. Quality control may be somewhat inconsistent, and it may just not write as smoothly as you would like it to. Well, usually the first thing you want to do is grab your loop and check the nib tines for alignments. You want to make sure that one is not off and dragging on the paper and making it feel scratchy. If that's the case, then micromesh isn't going to help you at all, and in fact it could ruin your nib if you don't have your tines properly aligned. I would say probably 90% or so of all scratchiness can be fixed just with a simple tine alignment, which doesn't void any warranty. It doesn't cause you any problems, and it's minimal hassle as long as you have some kind of magnification to see it. But for those times when you have it properly aligned and it still feels scratchy and you have no idea why, it could very well be that micromesh could be your answer to get your pen writing as you want it to. Now, I do want to give you proper warning here. This is my disclaimer of sorts for this video. Micromesh is an abrasive. It is modifying your nib, and it will pretty much void any pen manufacturer's warranty. So you want to make sure that if you're using this, that you know what you're doing. Practice on cheap pens first, or pens that are out of warranty or that you're going to throw away anyway. Make sure that you're not taking your great-grandfather's pen that was passed down through your family and throwing that on this stuff without knowing what you're doing. In fact, some pens you're probably never going to want to use with micromesh, just because it is possible to do damage that you would need a professional to fix by using micromesh. So you want to make sure that you are really just kind of being conservative. And if you're not comfortable using it at all, just don't. Really, it's kind of a tinkerer's tool and something that you should feel comfortable using if you're even going to attempt it. So there's my little disclaimer. This is micromesh. This is something that we offer through gouletpens.com. This is a 6" by 3" rectangle of micromesh. It's a 12,000 grit. You can see that on the back here. But it's not the same grit that you have with sandpaper. The 12,000 grit equates to about 2 microns, which a micron is 1,000th of a millimeter. So that is pretty darn small. And that basically refers to, the size of the actual abrasive particle that's adhered to this cloth backing. The 12,000 grit refers to how many of those little particles are in 1 square inch. So it's pretty fine. It doesn't even feel like an abrasive. It feels almost kind of like leather or suede, but I promise you, it's abrasive. And the whole point of the micromesh is that you are going to write on it with your fountain pen in order to smooth out any inconsistencies or any scratchiness that you might have on the tip of your fountain pen nib, so that it feels, pretty much as you feel that it should. It's kind of a repair tool if you want to think about it like that. It's to get your pen to a non-scratchy state. It's not going to get it to feel glassy smooth. That's where Mylar paper would come in. But micromesh will get you you know, pretty much to where you want to go. It'll feel smooth with a touch of feedback, with a touch of resistance to it. So kind of like maybe a graphite pencil will feel. You'll feel a little bit of drag when you've you know, honed it with the micromesh here. All right, so let's walk through the steps that you want to do when you're using micromesh to smooth your nib. The first thing you want to do, if you know, is obviously use the pen and see if it feels scratchy to you. Usually if it feels scratchy, it'll feel scratchy in one direction or another. That's because the nib consists of two tines that join together, and there's usually one that's higher or one that's lower. That's called a misalignment, and that you want to try to knock that out before you get to the point where you're doing any kind of smoothing. So it's good to grab a loop, such as the Goulet loop or whatever loop that you use. It's essentially a magnifying glass. Whatever you're comfortable with. So you want to look in here and you want to see and make sure that the tines of your nib are actually properly aligned. So on this one, you know, they are pretty well aligned. So I'm just using this as an example. This is a Goulet nib that I have on a Noodler's Ahab pen. This is kind of just for demonstration purposes. It's not actually scratchy, but I'll give you the idea. So I've got proper alignment. That's great. You can check the Goulet loop video to see how to actually do the alignment. But now we're at the point where, okay, we know we're aligned. It's feeling scratchy. You know, I'm, you know, comfortable working on this because I know I'm going to be responsible for anything that I do to it. So the first thing you want to do is you want to ink this thing up. So, you know, different pens will ink up different ways, but, you know, fill your pen with whatever method is required. Now, as far as the ink choice goes, I've got Noodler's Black here. I know a lot of people have their own preferences for what ink they want to recommend. You know, a lot of nibmeisters that do nib tuning and stuff all the time will have their own individual preferences. I wouldn't say that any one ink is better than another. You know, really it comes down to what are you comfortable with and what ink do you use a lot, what ink do you feel comfortable with because you use it, you know, more than some others. So I would tend to recommend to use an ink that you use a lot and that you're very comfortable with. And that could vary for a lot of different people. So I don't think there is any one answer for the right ink to use. I have Noodler's Black because I have a lot of experience with it in a lot of different pens. I've done the Nib Nook writing sample of every pen that we have at gouletpens.com. I've done all of that in Noodler's Black on Rhodia paper. So I am very comfortable with how Noodler's Black should feel on Rhodia paper. So that's why I'm going to use that for my own one. And then the Goulet nib, you know, this is just one I chose for demonstration purposes, but I'm also pretty comfortable using that one. So I'm using an Ahab here. It's a piston filler with a plunger here. I'm not going to fill it all the way, but there you go. You get the idea. And I forgot a paper towel, because I always do, but there we go. Just wipe off my nib. Okay, so that's how you fill a pen in like 5 seconds. But anyway, so the first thing I want to do once I have my pen inked up is to make some figure eights on some paper. Now it can be whatever paper you're comfortable using. I find it's best to use something, you know, consistent, to use something that I'm comfortable with, that I know how it should feel, something that is consistently made. That's why I really like Rhodia. By the way, this is a broad nib I'm using here, so that's why it looks so very bold. But let's say, as an example, okay, that this nib feels a little bit scratchy. What I want to do is I want to take my micromesh and I want to do that same figure eight pattern. You can see I've got a little figure eight here already. And you want to keep it inked up. This is kind of a fresh piece of micromesh. I did a little bit of dry writing on it with that figure eight. But you just want to, you know, kind of hold it down and make some figure eights. Okay, and you want to go pretty slow. You don't want to do a lot of them, okay, just a few. And then bring it back to your paper and make some more figure eights. If you find that, for example, it's scratching going from right to left, if you find that that's where it's scratching, that usually means that one of the tines needs a little more work than the other. And you can kind of just go and do that motion a few times just to work on that one. And try it again. See if that helps at all. If you find it needs some more, just bring it back. Do some more. And the ink in this case is actually acting like kind of a lubricant. If you're using it dry, then essentially when you are doing your figure eights or your hash marks or whatever, then the metal that you're grinding off of the nib could grind it a little more aggressively. I have a woodworking background, and whenever you are sanding something, if you are sanding something that has particles that could come out, it's usually better to try to sand it wet. Whenever you're sanding anything like any wood finishes or stuff, it's always better to sand it wet. Same concept here. The ink kind of keeps it lubricated. So whatever you feel, the figure eight should give you a pretty full range of what you should be feeling. And you don't really need to work on different parts of the micromesh. You might have certain parts that'll wear down over time, but really you just kind of keep going until you feel comfortable, until you feel that you've worked out all of the rough spots, if you will. And then pretty much once you feel like it doesn't feel scratchy anymore, you want it to feel consistent. And really the advantage that you have by doing this yourself is you are going to be holding the pen the way that you like to write with it. So as you're doing your figure eights, if you want to, you can kind of lower the pen angle, you can raise the pen angle a little bit to try to smooth out different parts of the nib. But really pretty much you want to keep it as you are going to be writing with it. So as you're doing your figure eights, you are going to be honing it to your specific writing preference. And then really that's about it. You don't want to go too aggressively. It's really good to stay and, do a couple, go back, do a couple, go back. And you never really want to press into it. You're pretty much just letting the weight of the nib itself determine how much pressure you're putting on the micromesh. If you push too aggressively, it is easy to overdo it. If you do too many figure eights without going back and checking the paper, it is easy to overdo it. If you overdo it, you can end up with flow issues with your ink. And that's really not something that you want. So you really just want to make sure that you're being careful, you're checking to make sure that you're liking how it feels, and stop when you've worked out the scratch. Now really what's going to happen once you get to the point where you have worked out any scratches is you're going to feel it's relatively smooth. It may be smoother than you've ever known before if you don't have a lot of experience with properly writing pens. If you want to get really, really smooth, that's where something like Mylar paper would come in, and that's this stuff here. That I'm not going to get into on this video, but that is how you hone it further. You're only going to be able to get so smooth with micromesh, okay? So you want to go with essentially a finer grit abrasive, which is what that Mylar paper is for. But the micromesh should be able to knock out any scratches that you're dealing with. Once you're done with your smoothing on your micromesh, it's pretty much a good idea to take a brass sheet, if you have it handy, and just take it and floss it in the tines of your nib. If you're using it inked up, there shouldn't be too much residual metal shavings or anything that's coming off of the nib and getting up in your tines. But really, it's just kind of a handy thing to do. If you don't have any brass sheet, I wouldn't sweat it too much, but if you have brass sheet handy, definitely take and just floss the nib like that a few times before you go on about your writing, just to make sure you've cleared it through and you're good to write. It's not a bad practice whenever you're doing any kind of nib smoothing to take and floss it with the brass. And then once you're done, you're going to have some ink left on your micromesh here. Just take a paper towel or something and you can kind of dab up the excess. You can use a little bit of water and wipe it away. You are going to have some ink left on there, and after you use this thing for a while, it's going to look really just disgusting, and it's going to be covered in figure eights and marks and different color inks possibly. That's okay. This micromesh will last a really good time. Theoretically, it will wear away over time, and you may want to replace it at some point. But honestly, unless you're doing, hundreds of nibs, you're probably never going to need to replace it unless you lose it or something like that. it's really pretty long lasting, some pretty durable stuff. So one sheet should really pretty much last you the rest of your life. If you have any questions about how to use Micromesh or anything else fountain pen related, you can just leave a comment on YouTube or my blog, Ink Nouveau, or you can hit me up on Twitter or Facebook. Thanks so much for watching today, and write on.